Right, now we're officially live. So I'm here, I'm Laura Jane, and I'm here with my friend Julie Mink Schiffman. And you're up in
Hi.
the Bay Area, right, Julie?
Yes, Bay Area, California.
And I'm here in Long Beach. And so this turned out to be installment two in this conversation series that I found myself wanting to put together of people that I'm inspired by who have some really interesting education and parenting background and studies and stories. So I
Hmm.
invited Julie, and you wound up being person number two I get to talk to. And I'm so excited because I feel like you just have, yeah, your own amazing, unique story that has made you such an expert. Working with other people's kids and your own, and developing community with some of your programs and ventures, and yeah, and I know you have kind of a specialty, I think, of in helping people understand how to work with kids who, a lot of us have kids who have more intense um, expression of needs or more sensitivity, or different ways that we're learning to even talk about that respectfully, right? Much less deal with that. So thank you for being here. And yeah, and I'll just say before I ask you more, for people who are joining us, that my intention with this series is to just support parents at this time in supporting our kids as we work with these new formats in education, and we're dealing with things like being home more possibly with the pandemic and limited with some activities, and then also maybe some concern about our kids' mental health as well as our
Yeah, exactly.
Hi. It started.
family life. Family life
Family
is
life,
right.
exactly.
This is part of how it works. uh, yeah. So here to just support parents and see what comes through that might be helpful as we all get what's next and where we're at. So thanks for being here, Julie. And yeah, first, would you be willing to share, how do you like to tell your story of how you've gotten where you are, however long that takes, and however you want to tell it, with being a parent and an educator and an influencer even in your community, I would say.
Thank you. So I do have a little short introduction that I give people when I tell them my story, and it goes something like this. I loved school. I loved school so much. I became a teacher. I loved school. I was that kid who played school at home with their stuffed animals. I played with my siblings. I was the teacher. I made lessons. I loved school. I loved the first day of school, and I loved the last day of school, and I loved every day in between. I loved my teachers. I loved my friends. I loved my assignments. So
Oh,
how do I end up here now helping people, you know, move away from their school communities and their school systems. So this is what my progress has been, my process has been. So when I was a kid, I felt like I was a very nice little round peg that fit so neatly into their round holes. Like I was exactly the right kind of student they wanted, right? I did everything they asked. And then I became a teacher, and I saw from a different perspective how damaged the system was and how difficult it really was to be a teacher in the system, doing what you loved, connecting with children. So suddenly I felt like I was a square peg in their round hole, and
wow.
I no longer fit. So I left the system and I became independent. I did tutoring and nannying, and all of which paid more. And then I became a mom. And then I became a mom of kids who were going to be school age. And then I decided to investigate homeschooling and learning about John Holt again, because it turned out we had actually learned about John Holt in my college education program for becoming a teacher. Because as many of us know, John Holt was an educator himself, and his first couple of books were written from the perspective of an educator trying to change the system. They didn't tell us was the next book he wrote was called Teach Your Own, because he then realized that there's no better place than home to show your children the world. And so anyway, I'm now a mom and considering unschooling and starting to undo some layers of real school harm that I didn't recognize had happened to myself when I was a student, because like I said, I just thought I loved school. And I'm starting to see the things like I never learned for my own curiosity and my own pleasure. I only learned for a grade and to get approval from someone else. I never exercised the muscle in my brain, that creativity muscle, where I felt like I was artistic but not an artist, because I could never think of anything to create because I was so used to having an assignment of what to create in my art classes. And I recognized that I became wildly conformist and wildly, a very much a people pleaser, which is a very scary place for some young women to be sometimes. And it's an easy thing for us to default to as young women, to just want to please authority. And I never questioned authority. And so I'm not saying that school creates people who are uncreative and not outside the box thinking, because clearly here we all are, many of us having had traditional school backgrounds, and yes, we are creative and we are questioning and outside the box thinking. But it took a long time for me to get there. And so I started to then think, maybe, just maybe, I actually was a square peg all along, and I had to chisel away at my corners and edges to fit neatly into their round holes. And that's what I think happened. And that's my story, how I got to where I'm at.
I love that analogy of the square peg and what a square peg winds up doing to themselves to fit in that round hole. And yeah, just that story that I can so resonate with too, of being a good student does mean have some impact on our psychology and our sense of direction, for sure. So
Right.
yeah. And then you've wound up also, because I know some of your expertise has been in like what's been called special education, right? And working even more with young people who have, which I think all kids may have, intense times and moments and expression of feelings, right? Especially if they're allowed to, and sensitivity.
Right.
So I feel like it's a conversation for a lot of parents to be open to, right? Whether they identify like their kids as that or not. So, I
Right.
mean, anything you want to say about what you've learned about that? And even as we are thinking about people dealing with their kids right now and living with their kids and maybe with
Right.
them more, and now getting ready to perhaps receive some instruction and new course instruction, right? So, yeah, how would you like to weave in that conversation?
So I do have a master's degree in special education, and my teaching background was in the special ed classroom. And my own children have some sensory and ADHD things that would be considered disorders and disabilities and the like within the system. And outside the system, it's just a learning difference. You just learn differently. It becomes less of a disorder or dysfunction or disease when you take away the structure of the classroom and the expectations of the classroom. And so for parents who are struggling along those lines with kids who, for better or worse, have a title, a label of ADHD, they may find that, outside of the classroom, some of the challenges they've had for learning, when given the opportunity to learn the way that feels right to them. And for many of them, it is on screen. They really do focus when they are able to consume information through a media that really resonates with them.
Interesting.
And
That, huh? That I
Oh
didn't know
yeah,
if
for
you've heard that
sure.
distinction, but I guess I've perhaps you certainly noticed some kids like to learn or play more through
Hmm.
screen time than others, and I know so many parents who question that and get worried about that. So, and would that also extend into like a Zoom call where you're sitting with your teacher, or is that not necessarily? Do you think that might be more engaging for um, a kid with
Oh,
that?
it's dependent on each child for
Yeah.
sure, but I could absolutely see in some cases it being a very beneficial situation because the sensory kid who's in a classroom of 20 other students is now in their room focused.
Yeah.
Yes, there might be 20 other people on the screen, but their immediate surrounding is calmer,
Right.
and the lighting might be more appropriate for them,
Uh-huh.
and a whole bunch of other factors that they might be able to stand, they may be able to have more fidget stuff, they may be able to be more present because they're more comfortable. And then there's also the anxiety issues that come along with that. A child who has like fears in being in school, social anxieties, those kinds of things, might feel very much more comfortable being at home and participating in their schools. So but I've also heard stories where it's been disastrous for some students, where it's just and I'm not sure that it's a fault of the technology, but
Yeah.
more of a we're still learning how to best use this technology and best engage with students on this level. And I know that there's been a lot of efforts on how do we take this to the next level so that it is more engaging. And so I love that those conversations are happening.
Right. Right. And I feel like throughout these conversations that we all agree that we give respect to the teachers who are in the traditional settings, and that's something that was coming up in my conversation with Kristen just now, and I can hear that coming through you too. That we could be excited about what changes may happen in even traditional education because of things like the change because of the pandemic, right? That, like you're saying, for a lot of kids, it might actually be easier to focus at home, and it may, yeah, there may be more freedom of movement within the moment, being able to stand or move and things like that. So interesting, yeah, that we could be hopeful that this could be some changes that may benefit the range of learners, and then still hopefully parents who that format really doesn't work for, they can know that there are other choices too. Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
which would be like calling yourself more of a homeschooler. But yeah, I really love that this could be inspiring to all of the above. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on, I guess, because one of the questions, I know you've been really involved in creating community and building things, and I know some of those things are probably on hold right now because you had like live centers and things that you've been
Right.
running and building. But what are your thoughts on how kids and families can find community at these times, as we know that's so important in any fulfilling family life or even educational life. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on how people can find that or create that in these times that you've been thinking about?
It's so challenging. It's unbelievably challenging, because our homeschool world has been, excuse me, upended just as much as the school kids world has been upended. The only difference is that the one piece, the education piece, where we have to be responsible for the education, that doesn't come into play. So it doesn't throw that piece into it, which is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming piece to it. But every other aspect of our lives has been affected, just like anybody who has a kid in school.
Yeah.
So our social interactions came to a screeching halt. Our weekly park days, our community events, our end of this year pool party, and there is no not back to school picnic, and there is no summer beach party. There just there was no prom. There was no all of this, and so. What are homeschoolers doing to maintain connection? It's a lot of online stuff. People are connecting online, and you can find maybe one or two families that your child or your children connect with, and, you know, have very careful, socially distanced connections there too. But, you know, and some families may be more comfortable with something, you know, less restrictive. So it really, it's going to, you know, with everybody having a different opinion on whether they should wear a mask or they shouldn't wear a mask, or whether they should get together and they shouldn't. And, you know, it's going to be important to find a little bit of connection with people who you do agree with on those levels. And then, you know, we'll see what the future holds. It's definitely challenging. There's no doubt about it. It's definitely challenging.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you though for that, what you shared about that. And I'm also wondering, what are your thoughts? Because with this conversation of social time limited and such restrictions and challenges of what's happening right now. So thinking about our kids' mental health, basically, and
Right.
how can we be helping take care of them or be aware of that? Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that with what you've learned about kids and expression of emotions and things like that?
Absolutely. I'm actually writing something about it right now. And so hopefully when we're done, I'm actually editing it. It's just about finished. I'm about to finish editing it. And then I'll definitely share the link with you shortly after we're finished here, and you can post it here. But yeah, this is a huge concern of mine, this mental health issue. So my thoughts are, it centers around, deschooling really. And, the process of deschooling not only includes getting away from the schoolish mindset that learning happens at school with tests and quizzes and assignments, but it's also a way to kind of decompress and de-stress and process whatever trauma got you there in the first place, especially for, what we call the unintentional or accidental homeschooler, which pretty much everybody is right now, is an unintentional homeschooler. And so when I work with families who are new to homeschooling, there's two distinct categories. There's the intentional homeschooler and the unintentional homeschooler. And the intentional person comes to homeschooling with a preconceived idea of what education is going to look like for their family, and that's different than what school provides in whatever way. It could be a variety of different ways, but they have a different idea, and so they're going to take charge and they're going to intentionally homeschool their child. Unintentionally, they come to homeschooling with a host of different other reasons. Sometimes it's bullying, sometimes it's gifted and twice exceptional kids not having their learning needs met, sometimes it's an illness, the child's illness, or a family member's illness, or a pandemic. Like, this is what we're dealing with right now. And all of these things come with trauma, with levels of trauma that need to be processed before anyone is going to be able to learn anything ever. So for me, I'm seeing a lack of conversation around the trauma that families are going through. So not only are they having to process the trauma of the pandemic, the global pandemic, and the lack of connection, but they're also processing the trauma of the loss of their school communities, because school doesn't look like the way it did. The events and the place that made school, the space that made school is no longer there. And it's a true, and the division that we're seeing within school communities where we should go back to school, we should do distance learning, a little bit of both. Nobody can agree on anything. And it's so divisive, and people have not processed this trauma of the loss of their communities. And, the homeschool community is trying to kind of step in and embrace people. But as I pointed out in other writings that I've done, it's not the same thing. We are homeschooling and they are pandemic pod schooling, and it's a different, there are differences. And so when they ask for help, it's not necessarily something that we can provide combined with the fact that community looks different for us right now too. This doesn't look like our typical homeschool community anyway, right? So it's very hard for us to step in and say, we have the community you're looking for, because we don't really have it right now. I mean, traditionally we did, but like right now it's not as viable and not as vibrant as it has been in the past. So there's just a lot of loss and grief and fear and shame and so many feelings going on. And then add to that people are being shamed for considering homeschooling, withdrawing their kids from the system. And so there's more that I can say about that, but you can read about that later. But yeah, the mental health stuff is really, I think, being not addressed well enough.
Yes. And so I hear what you're saying is at the very least for us all to be aware that families, kids, the parents are going through some trauma and grief over just having to lose their school communities right now and become unintentional homeschoolers, and to just at least give ourselves grace if that's our situation, and our kids to really be aware that they're going through some grief and trauma pretty surely, even if it is a better fit for them in some ways. They're definitely losing a lot too. There was probably a lot of like what being at school that they did love, right, that they're not getting. And so just the biggest part is being with friends, and anyways,
right,
that's not getting that much at all. So yeah, it's intense and feels.
And I want to bring up another point. So there's also a lot of talk about getting kids back to school for their mental health. And, there's been plenty of evidence out there that school is not actually good for children's mental health. Right. Even those like myself, right, like you, who were doing good at school, where we were doing school. There's a wonderful book by a woman named Denise Pope, I believe is her name. And she is a lecturer at the Stanford College of Education. And she wrote a book called Doing School. And there's a subtitle to it. And it's something about how, I don't want to misrepresent there, but the premise of the book is that she follows students as they do school, and the ways in which they compromise themselves in order to do school. And they compromise their health by maybe taking caffeine pills or staying up all night to study on tests. Or maybe they compromise their morals because they cheated on a test or their homework, or they copied something. And these are just things that you wouldn't have done if school wasn't putting those pressures on you, especially as, an adolescent. It's not healthy for your body. So, and then she also then covers all the ways in which these students thrive, and they're thriving in the things that they have chosen. Their extracurriculars, their volunteer work, or, their actual work, their outside of school employment. And these are the things that these kids are truly passionate about and excited about. And you can see how they're, anyway, so she makes this argument, these distinctions as an educator, very similar to John Holt, in hopes of, instituting something. Barky dog, there's a delivery. Hold on, let me get it out.
Family life. Wow, yeah.
He's really the best dog, but he's a very, hey, I know there's somebody, I know it's probably a delivery. I'm so sorry.
Right.
But Denise Pope Clark, I think, Clark Pope, she made the best argument for unschooling. And instead of, she's trying to have some sort of educational reform, educational change happen, but really she's just making a very solid argument for unschooling.
Yes.
And the point is the doing school, like it's a very much a thing that you do, and instead of it's actually more of a thing that happens to you also, that like the learning, the teaching happens to you instead of the student doing the learning. It's more like, you're receiving the information instead of absorbing it because you're finding it interesting and your questioning.
Yes, yes. And I feel like we might as well talk about that a little bit now too, towards maybe if it's towards the ends of our talk, but because yes, for people who are interested in more of like a homeschooling approach, it's awesome for you and I to get to share that there's this style of homeschooling that has been called unschooling or self-directed learning or lifelong learning, right? And you even are wearing a shirt, right, that is that no, there's no greater education than one that is self-driven. And who said
Yeah,
that?
that was Neil deGrasse Tyson.
So yeah, it's fun to share with people that there is this style of homeschooling that is legal in any parts of the world, at least where we are in California, where you don't have to do it like school, and how amazing that can be for people who are interested, because I think people are interested and amazed that that's even okay, much less can be this awesome way to do it, right? And so, yeah. And what do you want to say if you were going to share a little bit along those lines? I know we could go talk about that for 10 hours, but what are some of your
Yeah,
favorite?
I'm definitely getting a lot of requests from families to help them transition to homeschooling. And I have done that for about a decade now. I've helped families transition to homeschooling as a volunteer for statewide organizations, as a local group leader here in Marin County. I have long helped families transition out of the school system and into homeschooling. But my heart lies with unschooling. I call it life learning. And that term was coined by Wendy Presnitz from Canada, just so you know. And so when families then ask me if I do consulting work and if I would help them maybe plan their academic year or help them find a teacher or help them find a right curriculum, and I'm just like, that's not. I can refer you to people who do that, and there are definitely is a valid approach in homeschooling, and many people do it. The academic approach to homeschooling is something that I know many people take, and it's wonderful for those families that it works for. And for our family, we found that this life learning approach, where we learn through experiencing life, by being involved in things, by having connections with our friends and communities. And so, how are we doing our life learning in this? I mean, if our lives are being limited, our learning could be limited. But we're very fortunate that we live in a time where you have unlimited access. I mean, the amount of resources that have come out online for learning has just been phenomenal. Just phenomenal, the number of resources online. Free too, plenty of free out there. Some paid for sure, but there's so much free stuff out there for you. But yeah, we really embraced this life learning after reading about it again with John Holt's How Children Fail. He started off with How Children Fail, and then How Children Learn, and then his third book was Teach Your Own. And if you're going to read John Holt, definitely he himself recommended, and I also recommend reading in the order in which it was written. So don't just start reading Teach Your Own or one of Instead of Education, something like further on down the line where his ideas are may seem radical. It's really great to read them from the start, because he writes them from the perspective of a teacher within the classroom, and he sees the ways in which, as a teacher, as a system, we're setting kids up to fail in the first book. And he writes about that from kind of like a memoir perspective, journalish kind of writing. And then the second book is How Children Learn, and he realizes that the changes that he's made in the way he approaches education and the way he engages with children, just the shift that he made. He's seeing learning happening in ways that it never did before. But at some point, he still realizes school is just a very limited construct of what learning really can be. And to think that learning is going to happen in a classroom with the same 20 to 30 people day in and day out, every year after year, is a very limited way of thinking about how learning happens. And that, learning happens, in my opinion, when I think about my school experiences, the best learning for me has been things like the teachers I had connections with, heart connections with, the teachers I was really able to have an attachment and connection to. That learning stuck around way more than the others. The other learning that really resonates and still I can remember are the big project-based learning. That's the stuff that we got very involved in on, multiple levels. It wasn't just, a written assignment or, it was something, that was a collaborative effort often. Those things stuck in my mind. And anything I was actually truly interested in, the topics of school that I was truly interested in, those things stuck in my mind. But, so those are the kinds of things that I try to say, let's just do more of that. Let's just do more of those kinds of learning. And we don't need the rest, because I don't remember any of it. It clearly doesn't have an impact in my life. And if we had more of that other kind of learning that seems more real and authentic and genuine, and it just sticks with you, it just sticks. Then what do we got? You never know what that looks like, 20 years down the line, when all that learning actually sticks.
Right. And that is one of the most convincing factors. I love that came up with Kristen as well, that, yeah, if we really are interested in what helps kids retain information, then yeah, like you're saying, that's the funnest reason to let it be not schooly, is because it actually helps them learn lasting, right, and in a meaningful way. So yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. That was so well said.
Thank you. And in unschooling, I think I neglected to say, unschooling for me, the relationship comes first, right? It's my relationship with my kid that is the most important. And so, that falls over into the parenting issues as well, not just the educational things. And it's just very much, it seems the same. Like I was saying, that heart connection with your teacher. I mean, if you have that, that's where children feel safe, where children feel no fear and no shame. And that's why it's so important to address these mental health issues right now, because no child can learn and no parent can help their child learn in a situation where they're still feeling these feelings of fear and doubt and shame and all these other things that are going to creep in unless it gets processed. It needs to be talked about, and it needs to be dealt with individually and on a family level and on a community level. And so I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it, because it's something I'm really hoping we can, as a collective, talk more about.
Yeah, and just be in the awareness of, right? And yeah, I love that reminder to just I feel like it's like, be gentle with ourselves and our kids, knowing that we're all
Yes.
going through this grief and trauma. And I agree that for me too, I feel like that's the heart of the way I've loved to parent and handle our education life, and knowing that's part of an unschooling approach, is making it about my connection with my kids. Like, all of it revolves around our connection, right? All the decisions, all the approaches comes back to making it about that connection.
Right.
And I like, one of the great reasons was because at any age, but especially as they got older, I felt like I wanted them to feel safe to come to me and connected, right? When they might have issues. So, but for all the ages and stages, especially because of the mental health issues that maybe many of them and the parents are feeling too, is making it about that connection, so that if they are feeling anxious, depressed, or even suicidal, that they are going to come to you because they feel safe and connected, right? Like, I feel like that is at the heart of what's important to most of us parents, but it's just nice to bring it back to mind, right? Like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's what's important for and what we really want to make important
Right.
in our
Absolutely.
approach. Uh, well, anything else you want to say as we come to a close here towards parents? And then I also would love to find out, like, well, I'll give you that chance, but can I ask you, are you currently then still helping families if people want um, coaching or consulting? Are you doing any of that at this time with people who want that for their schooling lives with their kids, or homeschooling, unschooling?
So for families who are transitioning to homeschooling, just in general, yes, I've started a company called 10 Toed, and we do events and have some other resources and support for families who are transitioning to homeschooling. Our next event is not yet announced, but it'll be fairly soon.
Like
We're
online
still,
events, right?
what?
You mean online events?
Yes, online
Yes.
events,
Okay. Okay.
Zoom. So
Awesome.
it's basically taking all the work that I would do, that I have done in the last 10 years. Every time I met with a family and helped them transition to homeschooling, I kind of, made it into, an event style, and
Yes.
changed that over. So we got some different perspectives and some vendors, so you can get some resources to get started. And so it's a good quick way for families to kind of get a jump start. And individually, I do a little bit of consulting individually, but again, it's not for families who are looking for somebody to help them plan their academic year. It's really for families who are interested in pursuing a school-free life, a life without school, a true, without the whole construct of school, with just saying goodbye to all that. So for that, I do help families transition into that as well. And I have resources for them to move deeper into that if they are interested.
Okay. Okay. Amazing. Great. And yeah. And then anything else you would want to say to parents who are watching as we're coming to a close here?
Mm, we're right there with you. We're here. We're, we're all trying to get through this together. And, we're gonna see what happens on the other side. And, don't be afraid to make your move away from the system if that feels right for you, because I know there's a lot of pressure out there from people maybe in the community saying, you can't do that, it's not right. It's going to be okay. Your school will survive if you leave, and your teachers won't be offended. They want you to do what's right for you and your families.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, well, yeah, it sounds like great advice. So, well, thank you so much. That
Thank
felt
you.
that felt really good. I knew it would.
Yeah,
I,
thanks.
yeah, just I'm knowing some people will get some inspiration and direction from that. So thanks so much, Julie. I really appreciate it. And thank your family and your dog.
Yeah, he's been pretty good ever since.
Aw.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you all for being here with us. And yeah, be well out there. Okay. Thanks, Julie.
Bye.